Hi, this is Mr. Wartsky, and this is the third screencast of Ecology. We're starting a brand new PowerPoint, I know, and it says Ecology Tube. It's actually the third screencast of the set of notes. So let's get started. So we've talked about populations, right, properties of populations, and how the populations get together and form communities. Now we're going to talk about the ecosystem, which is a combination of biotic and abiotic components through which energy flows and materials cycle. So we're going to talk about the energy flow through the environment primarily. And the ultimate source of energy is the sun. I could put a picture of the sun there, but I think you know what it looks like. We're talking about 1.3 times 10 to the 24th kcals per year, but only a fraction of that enters the Earth, or reaches the Earth, I'm sorry. And why? Because of our atmosphere. So our atmosphere is broken down into 4 layers. The troposphere is closest to the Earth, and it goes up to 10 kilometers, and 75% of all the molecules in the atmosphere are found in the troposphere. The second layer is the stratosphere, which goes up 50 kilometers. That's the upper boundary, is ozone. The upper boundary is ozone, and 99% of all molecules are found in the 2 layers of the stratosphere and troposphere. In the mesosphere, we see a decrease in ozone, and then we have the thermosphere, which is closest to space. Now, 30% of all solar energy is reflected back into space from the clouds and dust, and 20% is absorbed by the atmosphere. It leaves 50%. 17% by water vapors and dust and droplets, and 30% by ozone and oxygen. So 50% of the sun's energy hits the earth. Most of it is reflected back, but some of it is used. And here's the different layers. Starting with the troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, and then we have the exosphere, which is space. The amount of sun hitting the earth is not uniform. Nope, nope, nope. The earth is round and is on a tilt because a Mars-sized asteroid hit our planet, which formed our moon and caused the Earth to tilt at about 23.5 degrees, plus or minus. The solar energy will create wind patterns, water cycle, and weather and climate. How? Well, remember that hot air rises and cold air sinks. So hot air can hold a lot of water. That's why it's humid during the summertime. And cold air will lose water in the form of precipitation. So at the equator, that's the hottest place, right? It gets the most sun's energy. The sun heats up the air rises. As the air rises, it will cool and lose its water, and we get rain. As the air rises, other air will rush in to take its place, and that is wind, because you cannot live in a vacuum. It doesn't work that way. Now, this also happens at 30 degrees and 60 degrees and at the poles. Now, the Earth rotates, and these two things create wind patterns, and precipitation creates the weather in the area. So we have here, right, the air is rising and cooling down, and then it's going to come down and it's going to sink here. Air comes in, there's a wind. Same thing as at 30, 60, and then at the poles, right? And this creates wind patterns here. And then the wind patterns, and because it rains, that is our weather. Now, the flow of energy through the ecosystem is the most important factor of the ecosystem. Now, only 1 to 3% of light that hits the plants is used for photosynthesis, only 1 to 3%. The trophic levels is the amount of energy at any one level. Hopefully this will make sense in a moment. The food chain is how the energy is passed from one organism to another. And now the food chain is broken down into different levels, which are trophic levels. Now the bottom level are known as autotrophs, or they are producers. They're found in the first level. They're primary producers, and these are the organisms that photosynthesize plants and algae. Right here, primary producers. This is the trophic level, a little trophic pyramid. And here's a food chain in which the grass is eaten by the grasshopper. So the arrows go where the energy is flowing. The energy is flowing from the grass to the grasshopper. The grasshopper is eaten by the frog, so it goes from here to here. The frog is eaten by the snake, so it goes from here to here. Now, we collect a bunch of food chains together, we will form a food web. Now we have the producers. Now, what's after the producers? Thanks for asking. Organisms that can use light and water to produce carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the source of chemical energy. So the producers take the sunlight energy and produces a chemical energy. Now, carbohydrates are also used to produce cellulose or the biomass. The gross productivity is the total amount of energy produced by producers, the total amount of energy. However, you need energy to survive, so the net productivity is the amount of energy left over after the plants use some of the energy to live, which is respiration. So plants do both. They photosynthesize with their chloroplast, and then they respire with their mitochondria. So the net productivity is equal to the gross productivity minus respiration. And the net productivity is what's used to produce starch. It's what's used to produce cellulose. Now, the sunlight intensity, temperature, precipitation, minerals all play a role in productivity. And productivity is measured in biomass, right? Because that is the stuff that's left over to produce the cellulose. The energy enters the animal kingdom at consumers. First, the primary consumers, which are either herbivores or omnivores. The primary consumers will eat the producers. The secondary consumers eat the primary consumers and are omnivores or carnivores. Tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers, and usually food chains usually have a limit to about 5 steps. 5 links. Why? Because you only pass on about 10%, 5 to 20%, but 10%, that's a rule of thumb, of energy from level to level. You'll run out of energy after about 5 steps. Now, there are detritivores, are consumers, and they're found on all levels. These are your decomposers. They consume detritus, waste, refuse, or dead organisms. And these are extremely important in the cycling of elements. So, right, energy pyramid, primary producers, let's say 10,000 joules. Then only 10% is passed on, which is 1,000 joules. Only 10% is passed on, which is 100 joules. Only 10% is passed on to 10 joules. So we're running out of energy exponentially as we go up the food pyramid or food chain. So if we add another chain, then we'll have 1 joule. After that, we run out. We run out, you know. So it's not cost effective. When they say eat lower on the food chain, they say eat lower here. Primary consumers or primary producers. Although a lot of our meats are primary consumers, herbivores, yeah, we do like our herbivores. So the biogeochemical cycles, minerals have to be cycled. We have the sulfur cycle, both anaerobic and aerobic, the phosphorus cycle, the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the carbon oxygen cycle. And we talked about those at the beginning of the year. So it's kind of, you're responsible for that information. Now, concentration of elements. The minerals and elements will become more concentrated the higher up the trophic pyramid you go. This is called biomagnification or bioaccumulation. So this happens with toxins with horrible consequences, like with DDT. So we have the pesticides sprayed here, right? Pesticides plus, and the mice eat them, and the mice eat a lot of grass. So we have a higher concentration of pesticides, the plus things. And then the snake eats mice, and they concentrate the pesticides even more. And then the birds will eat, the hawks will eat the snakes, and they have a higher concentration of the pesticides in their body. Now, in the Silent Spring, this happened with DDT, and the eggshells were affected by DDT, and the young did not survive. So Silent Spring, basically, there were no songbirds there because the young had died. Bioaccumulation happens with mercury and tuna, and it happens a lot. PCBs. The biosphere is where life exists on this planet. So it is in the water or on land. There's only two choices, right? Water, there are two types of aquatic environments. You can have fresh water, which is running or standing water, and the marine environment. Now, most aquatic biomes or environments show vertical stratification of physical and chemical variables. So up and down, we have the light, the photic, the amount of water that the light can pass through, and the aphotic, which is dark. Temperature, we have the warm sections and then the cold sections. Those are called thermoclines. So our water can be stratified by their depth. Rivers and streams are characterized by continuously moving water. So you start off as runoff from melting ice or from springs, and life in the water depends on the swiftness of the water. Riffles, which are really swift water, we have photosynthetic organisms like algae or moss that cling to rocks, and insects that live on the underside of rocks or gravel. Now, there's a lot of oxygen and nutrients, but it's really tough to be there if the water's moving too fast. Now, as rivers move away from the source, they become slower and quieter, and organic material may collect and decompose. And then we have, more life growing into the area. And the broad and really slow streams, if you increase the streams and make them really slow, they take on the characteristics of ponds and lakes. Now, ponds and lakes vary in size, and they have three zones. The littoral, the edge of the lake, is a really richly inhabited zone. Lots of plants, insects, amphibians, reptiles. You see a lot of stuff near the shore. The limnetic zone is the zone in open water, which can be photosynthetic, so that's the top layer. And the profundal is the aphotic zone, which is in open water, which is below the limnetic zone. All right, littoral at the ends, limnetic, profundal. And then you have bottom dwellers, which are always benthic. Draw the picture. It's a great picture. Oh. Lakes are also classified by production of organic matter, the photosynthesis. Oligotrophic lakes are deep, but they're nutrient poor because photosynthesis can only happen at the top. Eutrophic are shallow, and it is nutrient rich. And mesotrophic are between oligotrophic and eutrophic lakes. Now, eutrophication happens with the filling in of the lake from oligotrophic to eutrophic, eutrophication. Now, if, for example, minerals or nutrients are dumped into the lake, you can have a bloom of algae, and that bloom of algae will occur at the surface and it blocks the light from entering anywhere deeper than the surface. So if this blocks the light, this decreases the photosynthesis, and this decreases the amount of oxygen within the water. If you decrease the amount of oxygen within the water, then fish are going to die. That's the problem. Now, the algae will eventually die as the nutrients run off, and you'll have an increase of decomposers there to break down the fish as break down the dead algae. Wetlands are marshes, bog swamps. They are rich in life, lots of nutrients, lots of minerals, and sediment. But wetlands have a danger of filling in with soil and runoff. So here are the lake types, oligotrophic, and we start filling it in from mesotrophic to eutrophic. And you can see which one has the most life, which are eutrophic. So we're going to stop there and cover oceans or begin oceans in the next screencast. I hope you have a good night. Now, if you have any questions, read your textbook, watch the video over again, or ask me tomorrow. Have a good night.